Hey everyone, before I get into this, I want to ask you to hit that like button. Subscribe if you enjoy long, slow burn horror stories, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I know every storyteller on YouTube says that, but for this one, it actually matters. What I'm about to share gets heavier the more I talk about it, and seeing people in the comments telling me they're listening makes it easier for me to keep going. It reminds me I'm not just talking into the dark. Because right now, it feels like I'm sitting in a room with the lights off, telling a story to something I can't see. So, thank you in advance. This story is something I haven't spoken out loud in years. A few people in my life know small pieces of it, but not the full thing. I never had the courage to lay it all out, start to finish. Maybe I didn't want to believe the full timeline myself. Maybe I hoped that if I didn't tell it, it would fade away like a bad dream. But it never did. This happened when I was in my mid-20s. Back then, I worked as a part-time freelance videographer in northern Michigan. Most of my gigs were small, local events, real estate clips, short interviews for small businesses. Nothing fancy. I wasn't chasing fame or trying to land a big documentary deal. I just liked filming things. I liked the quiet focus of it, the way the world narrowed down to whatever sat inside my frame. I lived in Traverse City then, in a small apartment squeezed between a bakery and a bike shop. Rent was cheap, the neighbors were friendly, and the lake was only a few minutes away. My life felt simple and predictable. I didn't know that a single job would pull me into a story that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The job that changed everything came from a local environmental group. They wanted updated footage of natural sites around the Huron-Manistee National Forests. Nothing dramatic, just lakes, trees, wildlife, sunrise shots, the usual nature documentary stuff. One location on the list caught my eye, Blackwater Lake. I'd heard the name before. It sat about 45 minutes southeast of Traverse City, tucked deep into the forest. Some people talked about it like it was a hidden gem. Others acted like it wasn't worth visiting at all. What I didn't realize is that people didn't avoid it because it was boring. They avoided it because of the stories. But I didn't know any of that during that first visit. I thought it was just another lake. Blackwater Lake wasn't large, but it had this strange, perfect stillness to it. The water was darker than most lakes I'd filmed, almost like old glass. And it was always cold, colder than it should have been. Locals said the lake was wrong cold, like it held on to winter long after the snow melted. Some of the older fishermen claimed the North Shore was cursed. They never said how or why. They just shook their heads and told me, "Don't drop anchor near the north side." I didn't take any of that seriously. People love spooky stories about lakes and forests. It makes the everyday world feel more interesting. But when I drove out there for the first time, something felt heavier than usual. It was early morning, late October. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that makes it feel like the world hasn't fully woken up yet. The trees were mostly bare, and the air carried the smell of damp leaves. My boots sank slightly into soft ground as I walked toward the shoreline with my camera bag slung over my shoulder. Right away, I noticed the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. No birds, no wind in the branches, no insects buzzing near the water. It felt like the whole lake was holding its breath, waiting for something. The water sat perfectly still, like someone had laid a sheet of glass on top of it. I set up my tripod near the south shore and started taking wide shots. Usually, filming nature relaxes me, but that day I kept catching myself glancing toward the tree line. There was no reason for it, no movements, no noises. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing between the trees, watching me. It made no sense, but I kept feeling it. After about an hour, I decided to take some handheld footage closer to the water. Kneeling near the edge, I dipped my fingers in out of curiosity. The locals were right. The lake was freezing, way too cold for late fall. I pulled my hand back, wiped it on my jeans, and raised my camera again. That's when it happened. I heard someone whisper my name. Not shout, not call out. Whisper, soft, stretched, almost like the sound slid across the water before reaching me. For a second, I froze. I wasn't scared yet, just confused. I turned. expecting to see another photographer or a hiker walking by. But there was no one. The shoreline was empty. The trail behind me was empty. And the forest beyond that looked like a wall of dark trunks and bare branches. No movement. I waited, staring across the lake. I told myself it had to be the wind. Sometimes wind moving across water makes strange tones. Or maybe it was a sound from a far-off cabin echoing weirdly. That was the logical explanation. But the whisper didn't sound like wind. It didn't sound like an echo either. It sounded like a person standing right behind me. I grabbed my camera and stood up. My pulse thudded in my ears. I scanned the lake again, then the woods, then the trail. Still nothing. Not even a ripple on the water. At this point, the smart thing would have been to pack up and leave. But I told myself I was being dramatic. I didn't want to lose a good paycheck over some creepy sound. So I tried to shake it off. I kept telling myself, it was the wind. It had to be the wind. But deep down, I knew better. Because when the whisper came, I felt a shift in the air, like something had leaned close to me, like a breath against the back of my neck. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but the feeling stuck with me. Even as I tried to focus on filming, my hands felt colder, my breaths felt shorter, and the longer I stood there, the stronger the sense grew that I wasn't alone. Someone or something was watching me from the trees, not just watching, waiting. The heaviness in the air thickened, settling on my shoulders like a weight. I tried to ignore it, but it followed me with every step I took around the shoreline. Even when I walked back to my car, the feeling didn't lift. It stayed with me, pushing against my ribs like a warning I didn't want to hear. As I drove away, the lake vanished behind the trees, but the whisper didn't leave my mind. I kept replaying it, trying to make sense of it. I told myself the next visit would feel normal, that it was just first-day nerves, cold weather, and my imagination getting ahead of me. But I should have trusted my gut, because that whisper was only the beginning. And the next day, something even stranger happened, something that made me realize the lake wasn't done with me yet. I didn't sleep well the night after hearing that whisper. I kept waking up, thinking I heard soft footsteps in the hallway or something brushing against my window. Every time I checked, there was nothing. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe my mind was replaying that moment at the lake on a loop, refusing to let me settle. But whatever it was, it left me feeling tired and hollow the next morning. Still, I forced myself up before dawn. The job needed clean sunrise footage, and Blackwater Lake was at its best when the light was low and soft. At least, that's what I told myself. Part of me hoped returning to the lake would prove that yesterday's strange moment was just a fluke, an echo, a trick of the wind, anything that wasn't supernatural or strange. I wanted normal. I needed normal. The drive out there was quiet. The sky was still dark, and the forest on both sides of the road looked like a moving wall of shadows. As I got closer to the lake, a low fog drifted across the pavement like smoke from a fire. It wasn't the usual thin morning fog either. It looked heavier, denser. It clung to the ground in pale gray sheets, spilling between the trees and sliding across the ground like it had weight. By the time I reached the dirt parking area near the trail, the fog was even thicker. It hovered just above the earth, rising and falling in slow pulses, almost like it was breathing. I grabbed my gear, zipped my jacket, and followed the short trail toward the shoreline. Each step felt muffled, like the fog was swallowing the sound before it reached the air. When I reached the water, the sight stopped me cold. The fog sat low over the lake, so low it skimmed the surface in soft waves. It shifted constantly, not drifting like normal mist, but curling and unfurling, as if something beneath it was stirring it. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the faintest blue light touched the edges of the sky, giving the fog a pale glow. It didn't look natural. It looked alive. I set up my tripod anyway, trying to ignore the tightness creeping into my chest. I kept reminding myself that I needed this job, that people film fog all the time, and that nothing about this was dangerous. But that didn't stop the uneasy feeling settling into my spine. I knelt down to check my camera settings, and that's when I noticed them. Footprints. Wet, clear footprints leading from the waterline toward the trees. I froze, staring at them. They weren't boot prints or shoe prints. They were bare footprints, small bare footprints, child-sized, and they looked fresh. The edges were sharp, and droplets of water still clung to the indentations in the dirt. A ripple of cold rolled through me. I checked the lake, then the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No splashes, no sound of someone running through the woods. Nothing but fog. I had arrived before dawn. No one else was here. There were no other cars, no other trails leading in from the north or west side. So how were there fresh, wet footprints? I grabbed my camera, switched to handheld mode, and slowly followed the prints with my lens. The fog shifted around my ankles as I moved. The prints led straight from the water into the trees before fading into the leaf-covered ground. There were no return prints, no sign of someone leaving, just a path coming out of the water, ending at the woods. A soft voice behind me said, "I wouldn't follow those if I were you." I turned fast, nearly dropping my camera. A tall man stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of a faded green jacket. He wore a park ranger badge on front of his coat, and his hat was pulled low, though I could still see his eyes. They were tired eyes, dark, heavy, like he'd been carrying something for a long time. "Sorry," I said, catching my breath. "Didn't hear you walk up." "I made noise," he replied in a flat voice. Fog must have swallowed it. His name badge read Elias. He looked like he was in his 60s, built strong but weathered. The kind of man who had spent most of his life outdoors, walking trails and talking to trees more than people. I pointed toward the footprints. "Do you know who those belong to?" "They look fresh," he finished for me. "Yeah, I see that." "Well, was someone swimming? A kid, maybe." "There aren't any kids out here," he said. "Not this early. Not ever, really." I didn't know how to respond to that. He stepped forward, studying the prints with a hardened expression. Then he looked out at the lake. The fog rippled as if acknowledging his attention. "Don't wander past the north shore," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly, and he kept his gaze on the lake. "Just stay away from it. South shore, west shore, even the eastern trail is fine if you're careful. But the north shore? No." That was all he gave me. No explanation. No warning signs. Just a blunt order from a man who looked like he'd seen too much. "So the footprints," I started. His expression hardened further. "The lake gives back what it wants. That doesn't really explain." He shook his head, cutting me off. "Some things don't need explanations. Just respect the boundaries and get your filming done." Then he walked away, disappearing into the fog like he had been swallowed by it. I waited for the sound of his footsteps, but again, there was nothing. The fog absorbed everything. After he left, I tried to return to work. I set up my tripod again and forced myself to focus on the sunrise, though the light felt weaker than usual, like the fog was soaking it up before it could stretch across the water. I captured a few slow, panning shots and some close-ups of the mist curling around the reeds. But I kept glancing at the footprints, and the more I looked, the more wrong they felt. Eventually, I finished the first round of filming and walked back to my car to warm my hands. I sat inside for a few minutes, reviewing the footage on my small screen. At first, everything looked normal: fog, water, shoreline. But then I saw something in one shot that made my skin prickle. A shape, not solid, not clear, but definitely there. A faint silhouette standing behind me in the fog. It wasn't close, maybe 20 feet back, but it had the outline of a person, slim, upright, unmoving. When I turned the camera on myself, I hadn't seen anyone. I didn't hear anyone. There shouldn't have been anyone. But in the footage, the shape stood there, half hidden by the shifting mist. And then, as the fog rolled, it vanished. I scrubbed the clip back and forth, trying to make sense of it. The shape didn't look like Elias. It was too small, too thin, almost childlike. My stomach twisted. I shut off the camera and stared out the windshield at the lake. The fog pulsed again, rolling toward the shore like it was breathing in. I told myself not to freak out. Cameras glitch. Fog plays tricks. Depth and distance get messed up in low light. Maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe it was a tree partially caught in the frame. Something simple. Something safe. I needed this paycheck. I needed to stay calm. So I forced myself back out into the cold. I hiked along the shoreline, getting the extra B-roll footage I needed. The fog thinned a little as the sun finally crept up, though it never burned off the way normal fog does. It just drifted back across the lake, leaving the edges of the shore exposed and slick with moisture. As I moved along the trail, I noticed something half buried under a patch of dead leaves near the waterline. At first, I thought it was a chunk of driftwood or an old piece of bark, but when I nudged it with my boot, it rolled slightly and revealed a carved shape. I crouched down and picked it up. It was a small wooden figure, maybe 4 inches tall, crude and uneven, with hollow eyes carved deeper than the rest of the face. The wood felt rough, and the back of it was burned, blackened like it had been held against a flame until it almost cracked. A chill slid through me as I turned it over in my hand. Something about it felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't know why, but holding it made me uneasy, like touching a piece of someone else's memory. I looked around the shoreline again. No footsteps, no signs of anyone, just a figure lying there as if waiting for someone to find it. A breeze picked up, brushing across the lake. The fog shivered and drifted closer, curling around my ankles in a slow swirl. I felt the temperature drop, sharp, sudden, biting. I placed the carving into my backpack, and the moment I did, the air grew even colder, as if the lake exhaled a long, heavy breath. I zipped the pack, slung it over my shoulder, and took a step back. The fog shifted again, parting just enough to reveal the far edge of the lake, the north shore, dark, silent, hidden, and I realized I was going to have to go there eventually, even though Elias warned me not to, even though every part of my body tensed at the thought, because something at this lake wanted to be found, and the footprints weren't the only sign left behind for me. That wooden figure was just the beginning, and I could feel the next step waiting for me in the fog. The wooden figure sat heavy in my backpack as I drove toward Kingsley the next morning. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting it to crawl out on its own, even though I knew it was zipped inside the pack. The night before hadn't given me much rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fog rippling over Blackwater Lake, moving like a slow breath. I saw the footprints. I saw that faint shape behind me in the footage, and I kept remembering Elias's words. The lake gives back what it wants. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I needed answers. Real answers, not warnings spoken in riddles. Kingsley was the nearest small town to the lake, a single main road, a couple gas stations, some houses dotted along the hill, and a diner that had been there longer than most residents. I pulled into the gravel lot around mid-morning. A neon sign in the window blinked "Open" in soft red light, though some of the letters flickered like they were losing power. The building looked tired but warm, like a place where everyone knew everyone's story. I stepped inside, and a soft bell chimed over my head. The air smelled like bacon grease, fresh coffee, and old wood. 3 older folks sat at the counter, nursing mugs and talking quietly. A waitress wiped down a table near the back. The whole place hummed with small-town calm. I slid into a booth and ordered coffee. When the waitress walked away, I pulled out my notebook and camera, hoping the sight would make people more willing to talk. Usually, folks opened up when they saw someone taking notes for a documentary. It made them feel important, or at least useful. But not today. When I asked the waitress if she knew anything about Blackwater Lake, she paused mid-step. Her shoulders tensed before she forced a polite smile. "Breakfast special's a favorite today," she said, ignoring the question. "Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you," I said. But inside, I felt a ripple of unease. She didn't just avoid the question. She reacted to it like it was dangerous. After she left, I turned toward the group of older residents at the counter. They looked like they'd been coming here for decades. Men with faded baseball caps and weathered hands, and a woman with silver hair pulled into a low bun. I cleared my throat gently. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm filming some nature footage around the forest, and I'm trying to learn more about the area. Has anything interesting ever happened at Blackwater Lake?" They all fell silent. Not the polite kind of silence. More like the air got sucked out of the room for a moment. None of them looked at me. One man stirred his coffee with slow, tense movements. Another adjusted his glasses, even though they sat fine. Finally, the woman turned her head slightly, enough for me to see the tight look around her eyes. "There's nothing for you out there," she whispered. "That lake keeps its own." Before I could ask what she meant, another man stood abruptly from his stool. He shook his head once, sharp, like he was trying to ward something off. "Don't dig into that," he muttered, walking toward the exit. "Some stories ain't yours to carry." The bell above the door chimed as he left. I swallowed, unsure if I should push more. The woman still faced forward, her back straight, her hands wrapped around her mug like she needed its warmth. I tried again, more gently this time. "I just want to understand what's going on," I said. "I found something near the shore yesterday." A small wooden figure. Her eyes dropped to her mug. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, so softly I barely heard her, she whispered, "The girl in the fog carved things like that." A cold shiver ran across my skin. "Who?" I asked. "What girl?" She didn't answer. She pressed her lips together and shook her head, like she regretted saying anything. Before I could press further, the door opened again. Cold air brushed across the room, and when I looked up, I saw Elias, the ranger, walking in. His jacket was zipped up tight, his hat pulled low. He didn't look at the counter or the waitress. His eyes drifted straight to me, like he knew I would be here. He walked over, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down without asking. "I figured you'd come here," he said. "Did you follow me?" I asked, half joking but not really. "I don't need to," he replied. "People who see what you saw always end up looking for answers." I stared at him, waiting. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, then leaned forward slightly. "You want a story? Fine, but you won't like it." The diner was quiet again. Even the waitress avoided our table, keeping her eyes on the counter. Elias lowered his voice, and his tone shifted. Less of a ranger doing his job, more of a man carrying something heavy. "In the late 70s, he said, "a girl named Marla Grayson drowned in Blackwater Lake. She was maybe 14, 15, young." The name hit me like a small jolt, though I didn't understand why yet. "People searched for days," he continued. "Boats, divers, volunteers. They covered every inch of that shoreline. Couldn't find her. Everybody assumed she got pulled under by the cold or by the undercurrents. That lake has hidden pockets, sudden drop-offs. She didn't stand a chance." He paused, looking down at his hands. Then, on the 6th day, her body surfaced, right near the north shore. 6 days? I said, wouldn't the body have looked different?" He finished. "Yeah, should've, but it didn't. Folks who saw her said she looked like she'd only been gone a few minutes. No damage, no swelling, nothing." A long, uncomfortable silence stretched between us. The woman at the counter was pretending not to listen, but her hands were trembling around her mug. I cleared my throat. "So what happened after that?" Elias leaned back slightly, his expression growing darker. "People started hearing whispers, seeing shapes, feeling things that made no sense. Some said the fog moved wrong. Others said the lake tried to pull them in. Some fishermen heard crying from the shoreline at night." My pulse thudded. This lined up too perfectly with what I had seen. "So she haunts the place?" I asked quietly. "Haunt is one word," he said, "but I don't think Marla stayed behind to hurt anyone. At least not at first." "What do you mean, at first?" He looked toward the window, where the wind pushed dead leaves across the parking lot. "You found a carving, didn't you?" I tensed. "How did you?" "Because Marla carved things like that," he said. "Little wooden figures. She carried them everywhere. People used to joke that she left them like breadcrumbs. But after she drowned, those carvings showed up where they shouldn't. Fresh, within places no one had been in months. Burned ones washing up on the north shore. I felt the weight of the carving in my backpack again, like it grew heavier by the second. Something clicked in the back of my mind. My mother, a memory of her mentioning a childhood friend, a girl she used to meet near the woods when she was young. A girl named Marla. My breath caught. I think I knew her, I said, barely above a whisper. My mom, she once told me she had a friend named Marla from around here. I never thought anything of it. Elias's eyes sharpened. What's your mother's name? I hesitated. Claire. He let out a slow breath and leaned back. Then you definitely shouldn't be at that lake. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Because sometimes the things that stay behind remember faces, he said, and bloodlines. My chest tightened. Something deep inside me shifted, like a puzzle piece falling into place. I didn't know what it meant yet, but it scared me more than the footprints or the whispers. Elias stood suddenly, placing a few bills on the table. Leave the lake alone. Don't go back. That's not really an option, I said quietly. I still had work to finish. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, if you go back, don't go alone. And don't touch anything else the lake tries to give you. With that, he left the diner. I sat there for several minutes, staring into my coffee until it went cold. The older woman at the counter eventually rose and walked toward the door. As she passed my booth, she paused just long enough to place a hand on the edge of my table. Some stories wait for the right person to hear them, she whispered. Be careful that you're not that person. Then she left. I didn't go back to the lake that afternoon. I needed time to clear my head. I drove home instead, try and make sense of everything. My mother had known Marla. Marla had drowned. Marla carved wooden figures. And now one of those carvings, burned hollow-eyed, was in my backpack. By nightfall, exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep, but it didn't give me peace. I dreamed of a girl standing knee-deep in cold water. Her hair hung in long, wet strands, dripping down her pale face. In her hand, she held the wooden carving, the same one I found. She raised it slowly toward me, her eyes dark and unreadable. When she opened her mouth, lake water poured out. I woke with a sharp gasp, my heart slamming against my ribs. Sweat clung to my forehead, and the room felt too cold, like a window had been left open. I sat up and froze. The carving lay on my chest. I had left it zipped inside my backpack across the room. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Something was reaching for me. Something old. Something tied to the lake. And I knew it wasn't done yet. Not even close. I barely slept after the carving showed up on my chest. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that girl from the dream, standing in dark water, her hair dripping, her hand holding the little wooden figure like an offering. Morning came gray and flat. My apartment felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that sinks under your skin. I walked from room to room checking windows, vents, anything that might explain it. Nothing did. The carving sat on my nightstand where I had thrown it. In daylight it looked ugly and rushed, but those hollow eyes still bothered me. They seemed deeper now, like the shadows inside them had weight. I tried to be normal. I made coffee, forced down toast, opened my laptop. I told myself I would spend the day editing, stay away from the lake, and let my brain settle. That lasted maybe 15 minutes. I couldn't focus. My mind kept looping the same images. Wet footprints, a shape in the fog. Elias say my mother's name. The story of Marla's body surfacing near the North Shore. The place he told me not to go. I stood from my chair and paced the tiny living room. Every time I passed the bedroom door, I felt that faint pull again, like a line tugging at my chest. I tried to ignore it. I failed. Finally, I went back in and picked it up. The wood was freezing, as if it had spent the night in ice. My fingers tingled around it. This started with you. I whispered, didn't it? It was a stupid thing to say to a carved figure, but it felt true. Holding it, I didn't feel alone. A thought came to me, so clearly it felt placed there. Go back. I should have thrown the carving away. Instead, I slipped it into my jacket pocket, grabbed my camera bag, and headed out the door. The drive to Blackwater Lake felt different this time. No music, no background noise, just the low hum of the engine and the steady rush of air. Fog clung to the forest on both sides of the road, sliding between the trees like smoke. As I got closer, it thickened along the ground, crawling across the ditches and the gravel shoulder. When I pulled into the small dirt lot, my stomach twisted. The same old sign stood near the path. Half-rotten, letters faded. The silence was total. Even the engine seemed too loud. As I shut it off, I stepped out into the cold air and felt it settle onto my skin like damp cloth. I could hear faint water sounds in the distance, soft and slow. The south shore greeted me first, the way it had before. Dark water, low fog, thin reeds. I could have stopped there. I could have pretended that was all I needed, taken a few shots, and gone home. But my eyes kept drifting left, following the curve of the lake toward the far side, toward the north shore. I thought about Elias's face when he told me not to go there, about the woman in the diner, whispering about the girl in the fog. Every warning I had heard told me to stay away. Curiosity pushed back just as hard. I walked along the edge of the water, weaving between trees and roots, keeping the lake on my right. The further I went, the softer the ground felt. The fog thickened, hugging my legs, swirling around my shoes. The trees changed too. They grew closer together, trunks dark and damp, branches tangled overhead. Less light reached the ground on this side. The world seemed to narrow to a tunnel of gray and brown. By the time I reached the north shore, my breath was showing in the air. I wasn't sure if the temperature had truly dropped or if it just felt that way. Either way, I pulled my jacket tighter. Then I saw the dock. It jutted out from the shore like a broken finger, pointing into the middle of the lake. The boards were warped and rotting, some missing entirely. Rusted nails stuck out at odd angles. One side had already sunk low, so that the lake washed over it in slow waves. I stopped several steps away. Even without knowing the story, I would have known this place was wrong. It radiated a quiet kind of dread. My fingers brushed the carving in my pocket. For a second, I actually thought about asking it if this was where everything had started. Instead, I took out my camera. Work. Just focus on work. I raised the camera and began filming, framing the dock and the Blackwater around it. The fog made the shot eerie and sharp. Any other day, in any other place, I would have been excited about the footage. A small splash snapped me out of it. I lowered the camera and stared toward the end of the dock. The surface of the lake, which had been flat a moment ago, now showed ripples moving away from a small point near the edge of the boards. "Hello." I called out before I could stop myself. There was no answer. The ripples slowly spread out, then faded. The water went smooth again, smooth in a way that looked unnatural, like glass pulled tight. I knew I should leave. Instead, I stepped forward. The first board groaned under my weight. I tested it, then shifted on to the next one. Each step creaked louder than the last, the sound swallowed almost at once by the fog. I kept my eyes on the planks in front of me, careful not to look too long at the dark water between the gaps. Halfway down the dock, the fog rolled in harder, like a slow wave. It rose around my legs and waist, spilling over boards and licking at my boots. My breath came out in short, white puffs. I lifted the camera again, more for comfort than anything else, and pointed it toward the end of the dock. At first, I saw nothing but mist. Then something shifted. A thin figure formed at the far end, like it was stepping out of fog itself. It was soaked, water dripping from its clothes, from the long strands of hair that hid most of its face. The air around it seemed darker, as if the fog was thicker where it stood. I froze. My thumb pressed the record button, without me thinking about it. "Marla?" I whispered. The figure didn't move. It didn't wave or speak. It simply stood there, facing me, water pooling around its bare feet. For one heartbeat, it was solid. Then the fog rolled over it, and it was gone. My heart slammed against my ribs. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the spot where it had stood was empty. Only the dock, the water, the fog. I wanted to believe I had imagined it. I couldn't. The fog surged toward me, thicker and faster now, curling up my chest, then past my shoulders. The shore disappeared behind me. The end of the dock vanished from sight. I stood in a small, closed circle of gray. "You need to leave," I said out loud, but it sounded weak. Something cold brushed my sleeve. It was light, almost gentle, but I could feel each thin finger through the fabric. For a horrible second, I felt myself tilting toward the water. I flung out my free hand and caught the railing, or what was left of it. The rotten beam bent under my weight, but held. Then, just as suddenly, a calm slid over me. The fear stayed, but it moved to the edges of my mind. My thoughts slowed. My breathing evened out. The fog no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a blanket. Stay, a quiet thought suggested. Just a little longer. See if she comes back. You wanted answers. She has them. The idea wrapped around me like warm cloth. No more running, no more confusion. Just stand still and wait. Let the lake explain itself. Part of me wanted that. A big part. Another part, smaller but sharper, cut through the calm. This isn't kindness. It's a trap. I clung to that thought like a rope. I'm leaving, I said, teeth chattering now. The fog pressed closer, like it was trying to push me back toward the end of the dock. I forced one foot behind me, then the other, moving slowly so I wouldn't slip. I did not turn around. I did not look to see if something was behind me. With every step, the boards creaked and complained. The cold seemed to climb up my legs. My hand cramped around the camera, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. At last my heel found solid ground instead of decaying wood. I stepped off the dock and onto the muddy shore, almost stumbling. The fog was still thick around me, but I could see the shapes of trees now, pale and faint. I pushed into them, following the vague memory of my path. Branches scraped my arms. Roots caught my boots. I didn't care. I just kept moving. Little by little, the air grew warmer. The fog began to thin. Bird song returned in faint, broken notes, like the forest was clearing its throat after being silent too long. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I almost laughed with relief. I yanked open the door, dropped into the driver's seat, and slammed it shut. For a moment, I just sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing hard. My camera bag lay open on the passenger seat. Empty. My stomach plunged. I grabbed the bag, turned it over, checked under it. Nothing. The compartments where the camera should be were bare. I had carried the camera onto the dock. I had not brought it back. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The idea of going back out there turned my muscles to stone. I couldn't do it. Not today. Maybe not ever. I started the engine and pulled away from the lot. The trees slid past on both sides, tall and dark. I didn't look in the rear view mirror. I didn't want to see if something was standing on the shore, watching me go. The drive home felt long and slow. Thoughts buzzed in my head, but never settled. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were numb from gripping the wheel. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and dust greeted me. The radiator clicked faintly. It should have felt safe. I dropped my keys on the counter and turned toward the kitchen table. My heart stopped. The camera sat there, right in the middle of the table. Water dripped from it, forming a dark ring on the wood. The body glistened as if it had just been dragged from a lake. The lens was fogged from the inside. I had not brought it in. I knew that. For a moment, all I could do was stare. My mind tried to find a normal reason. A broken memory. A misstep. A trick. But no one else had a key. No one had followed me home. There was no way for it to be here. Unless it had never really left the lake at all. A deep, cold dread settled into my chest. Blackwater Lake was not staying where it belonged, out there in the forest. It had reached across the distance, into my home, into my life. I thought of my mother and the way her voice had gone tight when I mentioned Marla's name in the diner story. Maybe she knew more than she had told me. Maybe this had all started long before I was even born. That idea scared me more than the dock, more than the fog, because it meant this wasn't random. It meant I belonged to this place in a way I did not choose. The thought of calling her made my stomach knot. But it also felt like the only thing left that made sense. If the lake would not let me go, I needed to understand why. I needed to hear the truth from the one person who had known Marla while she was still alive. Whatever was tied to that lake was going to keep pulling me back. And it was changing everything for me, whether I wanted to return or not. The camera sitting on my kitchen table kept pulling my eyes back to it, as if it might move again if I looked away too long. The last drops of lake water slid off the lens and pooled on the wood like cold tears. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, not after knowing where it had been and how it had gotten here without me carrying it. I paced the kitchen for several minutes, my breath shallow, my mind racing. The only explanation, the only one that felt like it answered even half of what was happening, was the one I didn't want to believe. This had something to do with Marla, the girl in the fog, the girl who carved little wooden figures, the girl whose name made something inside my memory twitch, and the girl my mother once knew. I stared at my phone on the counter. I didn't want to make the call. I didn't want to drag whatever this was into my real life, into my family, but it was already here. The camera was proof, the footsteps, the dreams, and the carving that kept moving on its own. I swallowed hard and grabbed the phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's name for several seconds before I finally pressed it. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm but faintly tired. "Everything okay?" That question almost broke me. I didn't know how to answer it. Instead, I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something. Something serious." She grew quiet. "What's wrong?" I sank into a chair, staring at the camera as if it were listening. "Do you remember someone named Marla? Marla Grayson?" The silence that followed fell heavy, like the air thickened between us. "Mom," I whispered. She exhaled slowly, shakily. "Where did you hear that name?" I hesitated. I've been filming around Blackwater Lake. Someone mentioned her, and I just thought maybe you knew her." Another long silence. Then softly, "I didn't just know her. She was my best friend." My hand tightened around the phone. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly leaning on it. "I don't understand," I said. "You never talked about her." "There's a reason for that," she replied, her voice trembling now. "I tried to bury those memories a long time ago." I swallowed. "Can you tell me what happened?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded small, like she had become the scared girl she once was. "Marla and I used to sneak out to the lake in the summers. We were about 14. We'd carve little figures out of driftwood, dare each other to swim out further, tell stories about the forest spirits. We were just kids who thought nothing bad could ever happen to us." My heart beat harder. The carving in my pocket felt like it pulsed. "One day," my mother continued, "the water looked so calm, so peaceful. I dared her to swim out past the old dock on the north shore. She laughed. She always laughed. She said she could do it. Her voice cracked, and she went." I leaned forward, gripping the phone with both hands. It happened so fast. One moment she was swimming fine. The next, she wasn't. She started yelling for help. I jumped in after her, but the water was too cold, too strong. It pulled at my legs. I barely made it back. I watched her sink, and I couldn't reach her. Tears filled her voice. "The worst part," she whispered, "they didn't find her for 6 days. And when they pulled her out, she looked like she'd only been gone an hour, like the lake had been keeping her." I pressed a hand to my forehead. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because it's my fault," she said. "I dared her. I made her go. I killed her. And I never went back to that lake again." I shut my eyes. "Mom, listen. I think something is happening there. Something connected to her. I've seen things." Her voice sharpened, almost fearful. "Have you heard anything? Has anything followed you?" My breath caught. "What do you mean, followed?" She didn't hesitate this time. "Marla follows people she knew, people she loved, people she trusted, people she lost. She wants them to come back to the lake." A chill ripped through me. "Mom," I whispered, "what does she want from me?" Her answer came soft and shaking. "Someone to take her place." My stomach dropped. "You think she wants?" "I think she sees you as me," she said. "You look like I did at your age. Same eyes, same hair. Maybe she can't tell the difference anymore. Maybe she doesn't care." I pushed back from the table, breathing fast. My whole body felt cold, like the air had turned to ice. "You need to leave that place," my mother said urgently. "Promise me. Don't go near that lake again." But even as she said it, I felt something inside me resisting. The strange calm on the dock, the pull in my chest, the dreams, the feeling that Marla wanted me there. "I'll try," I whispered, though the words felt weak. "Promise me," she insisted. I closed my eyes. "Okay, I promise." It was a lie. Or maybe just a promise I already knew I couldn't keep. We hung up soon after, but I didn't move for a long time. I sat there at the table, staring at the camera, feeling the cold weight of the carving in my pocket. Everything my mother said spun through my mind, tangled and sharp. When darkness fell outside, the house felt even quieter than usual. The silence wasn't natural. It felt watchful, expectant. I tried to distract myself, watch the show, clean the counter, pretended to edit footage. But every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the front door or the hallway, certain someone was standing just out of sight. Around midnight, I heard the first footstep. Soft, wet. I froze. Another step, closer this time. Water smacking lightly against the floor. My breath hitched as I slowly turned my head toward the hall. Dark. Still. Then another step. I stood, inching backward until my shoulders touched the kitchen wall. My heart hammered, so loudly it drowned out everything else. I whispered, without meaning to, "Marla?" No answer. The next step was louder. Wet footprints appeared on the wood floor, one after another, leading from the front door toward the living room hallway. The sound of dripping water accompanied them, like someone had climbed out of a lake moments ago and walked straight into my home. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I took another step back, nearly tripping over a chair. Then the front door creaked, slowly, painfully, like it was being pushed open by a heavy, unseen hand. Cold air spilled in, the same cold from the dock, from the fog. A whisper drifted through the doorway. My name, soft, stretched, exactly like the whisper I heard across the lake that first morning. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. The footsteps stopped. The whisper faded, but the cold stayed. I backed into the hallway toward my bedroom, hands shaking so badly I fumbled the light switch. When the lamp flicked on, the room should have felt safer. Instead, the temperature dropped even further, and every shadow looked wrong. I locked the door, climbed into bed fully dressed, and pulled the blankets around me like armor. For a long time I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for more footsteps. None came, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake had found me, that Marla had found me, and that this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what she wanted next. I barely slept after the footsteps and the whisper reached my doorway. The wet prints stayed on the floor long after they should have dried. I scrubbed them until my arms ached, but faint outlines remained, as if the water had sunk deeper into the wood. Every sound that night had set my nerves on fire. Pipes shifting, branches brushing the window, even my own breathing. By dawn, I realized something important. Hiding inside my home would not save me. Marla had already found her way in. The only thing left was to face her where this all began. The thought terrified me, but it also felt like clarity, like the moment right before a storm breaks and the pressure lifts. I threw on my jacket, grabbed the camera, still damp from the impossible, and the wooden carving I no longer had the strength to leave behind. It felt like part of the story, part of her, and part of me. The drive back to Blackwater Lake was silent. The fog was worse than usual, so thick it blurred the trees until they looked like shadows pressing against the car. The closer I got, the more I felt the air change, colder, heavier, as though the lake already knew I was coming. The parking area was empty, swallowed by pale gray mist that drifted low along the ground. I stepped out of the car, the cold hitting me like a wall. Every sound felt distant. The crunch of dirt under my boots, the soft shift of the fog. The lake ahead sounded muted, its gentle waves brushing the shore like someone whispering under their breath. I followed the trail to the water's edge, my breath rising in trembling clouds. Each step felt like walking towards something waiting for me. something that had been waiting for a long time. When I reached the south shore, a dark shape stood near the tree line. It took me a second to recognize him. Elias. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression tense, like he'd been standing there for hours. "I knew you'd come back," he said. I swallowed, unable to find the right words. I didn't have a choice. "There's always a choice," he replied. "But this one was going to follow you no matter where you went." He stepped closer, looking older than before, the lines on his face deeper, the tiredness in his eyes heavier. "You're not the first person the lake called back, but you might be the first who can finish what started long ago." I clutched the carving inside my pocket. "My mother was with her when she drowned." His face softened, but only for a moment. "Then you understand why Marla won't let go." The fog thickened around us, sliding across the ground like slow water. Elias nodded toward the far side of the lake. "Come on," he said. "If we're doing this, we need to go to the north shore." The walk there felt longer than it had before. The forest was silent, every branch heavy with moisture. The fog moved strangely, swirling ahead of us like it was guiding our path or blocking our escape. My heartbeat grew louder the closer we got to the place where I'd seen the soaked figure standing. When we broke through the last cluster of trees, the north shore appeared like something out of a dream, dark, distorted, familiar, and wrong all at once. The broken dock stretched into the water, half submerged, the wood darker today than the last time I'd seen it. The fog hovered thick above the lake, not drifting but pulsing slowly, like a living thing. Elias stopped beside me. "Whatever you see, don't let it pull you under. It's not your fate." The cold in the air grew sharper, slicing through my clothing. I walked toward the dock, my breath shaking. Halfway there, the fog ahead shifted. A shape formed. A girl stepped out of it. She looked clearer than I had ever seen her, like she wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the mist, but a real figure standing before me. Her clothes clung to her body, dripping lake water in steady rivulets. Her hair hung over her face, dark and heavy with moisture. But even through the strands, I could see her eyes. Sad, lonely, waiting. "Marla," I whispered. At the sound of her name, she lifted her head, and then images slammed into me like cold water. A splash, a scream muffled by icy waves, a hand reaching up through the surface, the sharp bite of cold stealing breath and strength. A girl crying for help. Another girl, my mother, standing frozen on the dock, guilt flooding her face. A final, helpless sinking into darkness. I gasped and stumbled backward. Elias grabbed my arm to steady me. "She's showing you her last moments," he said quietly. "She wants you to understand." "I do." I whisper, my throat tightening. "I do understand." The images faded, replaced by the sound of gentle water lapping at the shore. Marla raised one hand, reaching out toward me, not accusing, not angry, just asking to be remembered, asking not to be alone. A sudden pull tugged at my ankles. I looked down. The ground beneath my feet, solid dirt only moments before, felt soft, like mud loosening around my boots. The waterline was still several feet away, but my feet sank deeper. The cold climbed up my legs as though the lake were reaching for me. Elias tightened his grip on my arm. "Don't move." But the pull grew stronger, spreading up my calves. The fog thickened around us, rising in soft waves. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the cold wrapped higher, gripping my skin like fingers. "She wants me," I said, barely hearing my own voice. "She thinks I'm my mother." "Or she thinks you can take her place," Elias muttered. The fog parted in front of us. Marla stood at the end of the broken dock, eyes locked on mine, hands still reaching. I felt something break open inside me, a mix of fear, sorrow, and something I couldn't name. Maybe pity, maybe recognition, maybe something even deeper, a thread stretching between past and present. The lake tugged harder. I felt water around my ankles. But when I looked down, the ground was still dry. My breath hitched. "It's inside my head." "It's both," Elias said. "The lake shows you what it wants you to feel, but your choice decides what happens next." The cold rose to my knees. The fog closed in tightly around my waist. Marla's hand reached closer, her expression pleading. I'm not supposed to be here, I whispered. Maybe you are, Elias said. Maybe you're the only one who can end this. But ending it doesn't mean joining her. The lake pulled harder. The cold gnawed at my bones. Choose, Elias said sharply. Either follow her into the water or walk away. But you can't stand between the two. For a moment, everything went silent. The fog stopped moving. Even the lake held still. Marla's eyes met mine, full of longing and a loneliness so deep it hurt to look at her. The cold rose another inch, gripping my legs, pulling gently, insistently. Elias's hand tightened around my arm, anchoring me. You choose now, he said. My breath trembled as I realized the truth. Marla wasn't trying to kill me. She was trying not to be forgotten. She wanted someone to understand what she had felt in those last moments. The betrayal, the fear, the cold. She wanted someone to acknowledge her pain, to remember her life, not just her death. But the lake wanted more. It wanted someone to stay. The cold surged once more, and for the briefest moment, I felt the water licking at my ankles, even though I was still standing on dry land. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there with the cold tug of the lake still clinging to my legs, with Marla's hand still half raised in my mind, with the fog wrapped around everything like a closing fist. My pulse hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The world felt balanced on a thin line. One wrong move, and it would tilt into something I couldn't climb back out of. Then I made my choice. I stepped back. The invisible pull loosened. The cold retreated inch by inch. And as I steadied myself, I whispered the words I didn't know I'd been holding inside me since the first moment I heard her name. I'm sorry, Marla. My mother is sorry. She always was. My voice shook. The apology didn't feel like it came from me alone, more like I was carrying my mother's guilt on my tongue, speaking it for both of us. It felt heavy and strangely freeing all at once. Marla stopped moving. Her figure, still half-formed in the fog, lifted her face toward me. Her eyes were full, not of anger, not of blame, but something that hurt much worse. Longing, a kind of sadness, so deep it seemed older than the lake itself. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She just watched me, the water still dripping from her hair and clothes, pooling around her bare feet. Her hand lowered slowly, the gesture soft, almost tired, like someone who had spent years reaching out without being heard. Then she began to sink, not downward like a person stepping into deep water. It was slower, more like she was being folded gently into the fog, piece by piece. Her shoulders disappeared first, then her hair, then the faint outline of her face. Just before the fog swallowed the last trace of her, I thought I saw her lips move. A word? A breath? A thank you? I couldn't tell. And then she was gone. The fog around the dock trembled once, as if letting out a long-held breath, before it began to thin. The tight, suffocating pressure in the air loosened. The trees around us shifted as a breeze rippled through the branches. For the first time since I had arrived, I heard something other than silence. Wind. Real wind. Not whispers. Not illusions. Just wind. The fog broke apart in slow ribbons, drifting across the lake until the water beneath it came back into view. Dark, still, but no longer heavy with presence. The dock lay half submerged just as before, but it felt like an ordinary piece of old wood now. Not a threshold. Not a trap. Just a broken dock on a quiet lake. I exhaled hard, feeling the tension drain from my body all at once. Elias stepped toward me, the crunch of wet soil under his boots the first solid sound I'd heard since the fog began to recede. His face looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen it, but relieved too. It's over, he said softly. I looked up at him. Really? He nodded once. The worst of it, anyway. You gave her what she needed. A small wave of relief washed through me, but it was followed quickly by something more complicated. Grief, maybe, or a recognition that something had changed inside me forever. Elias placed a hand on my shoulder. But listen to me, he continued. The lake never lets go forever. Not truly. Some part of her, some part of that place, it always stays. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold air. "But you broke the cycle today," he said. "That matters." I looked back toward the water. The surface was smooth and quiet, with only the faintest ripples from the shifting breeze. If I hadn't lived the last few weeks, I would have thought the lake was harmless, peaceful, even, but I knew better now. We walked back through the trees in silence. The thick, suffocating fog from before was gone, replaced by a soft morning mist that clung gently to the forest floor. Birds had returned, calling in scattered, tentative notes. The forest felt alive again. When we reached the parking lot, I paused beside my car. "Will you be okay?" Elias asked. "I don't know yet." I admitted. He gave a slow, understanding nod. "Most people aren't after the lake shows them something. But you're stronger than you think." I didn't feel strong. I felt emptied out, but I appreciated the words. Before I opened my car door, Elias added, "Whatever you do next, don't throw that carving away." "Not yet." I looked down at my jacket pocket, where the wooden figure felt unusually warm against my leg. "Why not?" I asked quietly. "Because she didn't follow you home," he said. "Not anymore. But she left you something to remember her by. That's different." The idea made my chest tighten. "Take care of yourself," he finished. "You too," I said. He offered a tired smile and then walked toward the tree line, fading between the trunks like he had always belonged there. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. The lake still sat behind me, hidden by trees, quiet and deceptively calm. I didn't look back as I drove away, but I felt the weight of it, the history, the memory, the echo of her presence. I took the long route home, windows cracked slightly to let in the cold air, try and clear my head. By the time I reached my apartment, everything looked normal, familiar, safe. I set the carving on a shelf in my living room, the one above my desk. The hollow-eyed figure looked less threatening than before. Sad, maybe. Lost. I told myself I would leave it there for a while, at least until I understood what to do with it. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Life slowly returned to something close to normal. The nightmares faded. The footsteps stopped. The cold spots in the house went away. But the carving never collected dust. Every few days, I would notice it in a slightly different position, angled to face a window instead of the hallway, or leaning back instead of forward. Nothing dramatic, nothing violent, but enough to remind me it wasn't just a piece of wood. Sometimes I thought about moving it into a drawer. Sometimes I thought about returning it to the lake. But every time I reached for it, a strange heaviness filled me, and I left it where it was. And every so often, usually when I was tired or distracted, I would feel a faint pull in my chest, gentle, almost curious, like a memory stretching its hand toward me. Then one night, months after the fog swallowed her for the last time, I dreamed of Marla again. She stood at the water's edge, just where the dock used to be. The fog around her was thin, glowing softly in the moonlight. She wasn't dripping or shivering. Her hair hung dry around her shoulders. She looked calmer, lighter, not angry, not sad, just waiting. She raised her eyes to mine, and for the first time, she didn't look like a ghost. She looked like a girl I might have known, a girl who once carved little wooden figures and laughed with her best friend by the lakeshore, a girl my mother couldn't save, a girl who didn't want to be forgotten. When I woke, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the echo of the dream still warm in my chest. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel dread. I felt something else. Acceptance, maybe. Something had changed in me, the way a place changes after a storm passes. Quiet but altered in ways only time will reveal. As I sat up, my eyes drifted toward the carving on the shelf. Morning light touched its burned edge, making the hollow eyes glow faintly. I didn't know if I would ever return to Blackwater Lake, or if she wanted me to, but I did know this. Some places keep a piece of us forever, and maybe, just maybe, Marla was still out there in the fog, watching the water move, waiting for whatever comes next. Waiting to see whether I would ever come back.